Actually not bad, bro. Not bad at all. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, afternoon, and evening, in fact. Welcome to Brain Food Live on Air. This is kind of a super unusual time for me because it's actually Saturday where I am right now. And this is okay, what the heck am I doing on a live stream? But very important that we have conversations across every time zone and make sure that we are addressing topics that are of interest to everyone, no matter where they are in the world. So, folks, delighted to bring Brain Food live to you here today. It is episode 297. We are trundling forward to the big 300. I think that's happening later next month. So, very excited for us to get us there. Thank you, Michael. It is indeed a great jacket. A gift from a person with better taste than I. Anyway, I just want to check everybody. Let's make sure we do some sound checks, AV, and all the rest of it. Let me know sort of whether you can hear me on the audio here, folks. I'm on Crowdcast. So if you're in Crowdcast and watching this, do let me know. Yes, Steve, a little bit husky this morning. Purely because of, Melbourne, great nightlife. What can I tell you? I had to go out and be there. Okay, Stephen, very good. Thank you very much on there. We are live streaming, of course, on LinkedIn Live. I can see myself there. And I think a few other people are also live streaming. I'm assuming you can hear me fine on LinkedIn. But do drop me a comment and let me know whether you can hear me okay there. How many people are watching on LinkedIn here? Do I have even anybody watching? I know most of my connections are probably asleep right now, but there we go. Oh, we have a few people there. That's great. Good. All right, excellent stuff. We're all live. Folks, we're going to have an interesting conversation today, slightly different change of pace, of course. But I thought it was very necessary for us to, as a community, to kind of talk about this. So obviously, we've had 2.5, maybe 3 months of Donald Trump 2.0, and already we can see that this is kind of a transformational administration. And it's not transforming in a way that's great for HR or TA. Let's face facts. And in fact, it couldn't be any further from the opposite of this. Seeing a number of things happening that in the United States that I don't think anybody's ever seen anywhere. We are talking about mass layoffs. This is not just like 20%, 30%. This is 80% full departments being shut down. We are seeing the Twitter playbook, so to say. Sending an email out, and if you don't respond, we assume this to be a resignation. That contravenes how many employment laws? I don't know, but I'm pretty certain it does. But we're going to roll roughshod over those things as well. So all of these things are ongoing. I don't think we can expect them to stop. What is the impact on talent acquisition and HR over in the United States, particularly for people directly affected in U.S. Federal government, but also, in the wider body politic and a wider culture. We've seen, of course, another sort of feature is this corporate rollback of DE&I, for instance. DE&I was like a core pillar of what TA and HR were all about. Let's not forget about this. And we cannot retreat from our previous commitment to DE&I just because the winds of change have indeed changed. So what does that look like for us as a function, as a department? How does this future look like? Is DOGE and Donald Trump and Elon Musk an existential threat to TA and HR? That is the topic of today. Let's debate this. We've got a bunch of really interesting and committed and knowledgeable local people to help us with that chat. I confess to be ignorant of this. I mean, I've got some superficial knowledge, but of course, I'm not a United States citizen. I don't live in the United States, so I've got limited knowledge. Let's speak to locals who might know something about it. And by the way, folks, happy to have like contested views and conversations on this. So I'm going to try and make this like an open session. But in the interim, I want to bring on the people that we've suggested that have volunteered in the first instance to come on. Let's talk to those folks and see where we go. But before we continue, we always have to thank our sponsors because without those sponsors, Bring Food Live on Air cannot be on air. And every week there is a company that steps up and says, you know what, it's important for sort of the discourse in the community to continue to be consistent and elevated. And this week, it is one of our favorite sponsors who've been with Bring Food, I think, for half a dozen years already. It's Greenhouse, folks. Greenhouse, one of the leading ATSs in use in our industry. And in fact, I suspect if we had a kind of a straw poll into the audience at large, it would still very much feature as one of the main sort of upgradable sort of products you'd upgrade to if you're struggling with a legacy ATS. One of the leading products that you would use if you are a recruiter, an internal recruiter in any shape or form. Check out greenhouse.com. They are a product that can really help you move forward in this kind of AI-enabled future. Cool. Let's get on with this. Yeah, we have this agreement. Let's make sure that's okay. Because we do need to have dialogue, folks. That's another thing I think we need to understand. DOGE and Trump and so on. These are democratic. At least Trump was democratically elected. He has the popular mandate. I don't think we can argue otherwise. Therefore, very important that we have dialogue and understand exactly where this is coming from. Okay, we have Stephen Rothenberg here, Rothberg, in fact. Steve, wonderful to see you as ever, looking really quite, really quite well. Not to say you didn't look otherwise. But yeah, great to see you, Stephen. Why don't you quickly introduce yourself? Who are you? What it is you do?
Sure. Founder of College Recruiter Job Search Site, early career, global. Grew up in Winnipeg, Canada as a Canadian citizen and came to the US for grad school in the late 80s. That dates me. And I was one of those fortunate ones that won a green card and became a US citizen the very first day that I was eligible.
Amazing. So you're very much kind of the this is not an untypical journey, right? But it is in the sense that people move to the United States, become U.S. citizens, and become fully sort of part of the community there. And we also have to say this: is like Trump has generally come forward through pretty much an anti-immigrant posture. And that's got to make people think, different things. When you might have been in the country a long time, have full rights and so on, but still feel, maybe worm has turned. Particularly if you are perceived to be, not the type of immigrant that people need to that the real America, quote unquote, would like to see. So we've got some ugly stuff coming in. Those are the facts. Okay, Steve, whilst we bring on our other friends, why don't you quickly kind of have an overview? Oh, we have one of our friends here already. It's Mike Bruni. Mike, wonderful to see you, sir. Thanks for joining the show. Mike, can you quickly introduce yourself? Who are you? What it is you do?
Absolutely. Thank you, Hung. Thanks. Good to see you too, Stephen. Hung, thanks for having me on. Yeah, my name is Mike Bruni. I've been around the talent acquisition, human capital world, if you will, for probably the last 30 years. Originally from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, but been in the Washington, D.C. area for roughly about 30 years. Spent my career in and around U.S. federal government. So right now I have a front row seat to everything that's going on here, coming to you, from right outside of Washington, D.C. So pretty much live, breathe, and drink everything government contracting. So look forward to the discussion.
Yeah, fantastic stuff. And we have Kate Bischoff here as well. Kate, wonderful to see you. Can you quickly introduce yourself? Who are you? What it is you do?
Sure. My name is Kate Bishop. I suffer from law degree. Please don't hold that against me. I am an employment attorney and HR consultant. I served the great country of the United States of America as the head of human resources for the Consulate General in Jerusalem and the U.S. Embassy in Zambia before starting my own practice 8 years ago.
Great to see you on the show, Kate, and great to have everyone here. Okay, let's just do this a quick lay of the land for the folks who are outside, not kind of entirely in tune with what's going on. Can we kind of have a sort of a brief bullet point overview as to what's happened in the first 100 days of Donald Trump. What can we say there that's sort of highlighted to you in terms of these like extraordinary orders that have impacted so many people? What's gone on? Can we give a quick timeline before we get into the rights and wrongs of all of this? So Steve, why don't we go with you? Stephen, why don't we go with you first? A couple of things that you can say, okay, this has happened.
Yeah. So one thing is, I don't think that much of this should be a surprise. Perhaps the speed, perhaps the breadth, perhaps the extent has surprised people, but it's entirely consistent with what Trump ran on. He said that he was going to do this, and he is doing this. So people who have been laid off, or their spouses have been laid off, or aren't able to get their benefits or whatever. This is, as I say, it's not a bug. This is a feature. This is not an accident. This is by design. So basically, when Trump was elected in early November, then took office January 20th, a lot of the first things that he did were issue a whole ton of different executive orders and other actions that were designed to essentially kneecap the government. Trying to close departments, massive layoffs, tying up funds. Elon Musk doesn't really have an official position, kind of depends upon what hour and what day the administration is talking about his role, whether they're talking to the press, whether they're talking to a judge, but it's very much a throwing sand into the gears. And I think at a very high level, the way that I've come to think of this is what they're trying to do is bring back someone like the East India trading companies, the Dutch West Indies companies, the Hudson Bay companies, where basically you had corporations that were quasi-governmental states, had their own militaries, they had their own navies, they literally conquered countries like India. And we want to think of those usually as like Britain doing this, but it was really corporations in some cases that actually were the colonizers. And I think that's where this is heading.
Really interesting overview, Stephen. And yeah, I think there's a parallel there. I've observed the kind of the Musk-Trump relationship is kind of a tribalization of government. So this is kind of looking at how South Korea have kind of done it, where there's been basically emerged huge corporations that have more say oftentimes than the government. Samsung, for instance, basically, has enormous power, more power than perhaps you would be comfortable with for any corporation, and it's a family-run corporation. So who in fact runs the country when you have basically a conglomerate that is dominant in multiple industries? We can kind of see something similar maybe happening with Musk, with Starlink, with Tesla, with X, which is probably surprised a lot of people. That is increased its relevance many fold since he took over. So really interesting worldview. I also think this concept of sort of this being a destructive approach and an advertised destructive approach is probably something even the Trump supporters would agree with. So, for instance, is that a common ground? For instance, like we might all agree that actually the purpose of the Trump regime here is to disable the government. And if you're pro-government, then obviously it's it's catastrophic, it's terrible. But actually, if you're like particularly anti-government, this is exactly what you voted for. So there's some commonalities, not just the case that everyone completely confused. There is actually maybe the only thing we might agree with is that we understand the purpose. Okay, very good. What has actually happened, Mike? Can you give us some sort of specific, firstly, what is an executive order? Maybe we go there first, Kate. For people who are outside of the US sort of milieu, can you describe what an EO is and how does that relate to how decisions are made in the United States?
So I would liken an executive order to something the CEO tells the organization it wants to do in its interpretation of the law. Okay, so you get the Title VII 1964, LBJ goes, I read this, and now as the head executive of the organization, I'm going to say you need to take affirmative steps to make sure folks from marginalized groups get a better opportunity in employment if you want to do business with the federal government. So LBJ sends out the affirmative action executive order, and then all the corporations fall in line because they want to do business with the US government. Trump takes these executive orders and says, I'm interpreting that this is my power. I want to do this. I'm going to rescind LBJ's executive order. And now, if you want to do business with the US government, you can't put DEI front and center of your recruiting efforts. So essentially, it is supposed to be, and I interpret the law. And as the head of the organization, if you want to do business with us, this is what you have to do. A lot of these executive orders are based on a power that does not actually exist, and it's just to feed the chaos that happens. In fact, if we look at what the courts are dealing with right now, 1 every 4 days of his presidency, he's been slapped down with an executive order that, nope, you don't have the power to do that. So essentially, an executive order is that interpretation of the law, but it doesn't actually have any real effect. It doesn't create a new law in and of itself. That job belongs to Congress.
Right. So it's not a law, but it kind of exists outside of the law in the sense that you can issue it. And of course, he's the president.
Yep.
And you might just follow that. As a citizen of the United States, then, you then have to make a decision. Presumably, you'd want to follow that decision. He's the man at the top of the pyramid. But it may not be legally enforceable, and we can imagine situations actually where the EO might in fact conflict with existing laws, for instance, and then there's a bit of a dilemma for people who caught in those two things. So I'm looking at this, and I'm assuming there's like a sense of confusion amongst people who might sort of want to be loyal citizens to the government and want to do the right thing, but they've got conflicting sort of instructions. And then there may be situations where you'd be in conflict with colleagues, perhaps, where you think this is the right thing, but actually no, the law says this, and then there's disputation all the way through the system because it isn't clear. So this is quite a significant conflict in that regard. Mike.
If I might just add a couple quick things to what Kate said. What she just said was fantastic. One thing that a lot of non-Americans don't appreciate is that if there is a statute legislation passed by Congress and there's an executive order that's inconsistent with that, the statute wins.
Yep.
So, and then when she was talking about like interpreting the law, that's what I think that's how I took what she was saying. So if there's no legislation, if there's something brand new, AI, for example, that Congress hasn't acted on, then the president has a lot more power because the president can then come in and the other thing that happens with executive orders is that they are about as durable as the pen and paper that they're written with. So presumably Trump is not going to be our last president. The next president can come in and with a stroke of a pen override all those. It's very easy to pass them by signing them. It's very easy to get rid of them by signing them.
Yes, and as Steve mentions, or by a Sharpie, which is exactly right. But I want to be clear. The executive only has power to which has been given to him by the people and by Congress. So there might not be a law on AI, but the executive cannot spend money. It cannot enforce something that doesn't exist. It can just opine about it, but it doesn't have any legal force unless there's a law that supports it. Our form of government is the Constitution, laws, federal, state, then we have regulations, then we have contracts. So if the Constitution trumps this, well, then your executive order goes out the door because it's not a law. It doesn't fall into that category.
All right, so this is really interesting, and from the commentary here, it seems that there is like constraints on Donald Trump's sort of power, so to say, but of course he's been elected, by democratically elected by people, but by enough people in the United States, sort of a majority of the people,
Plurality.
who
It was
essentially.
actually a plurality.
Right. So listen, this is very contested. So we know that all of this is true, but within the system as it was, I think we can accept that he was the victor. He has the mandate, and part of that mandate was, in fact, to throw this out. So so in this case, we have this we have the narrative. I'm reading the narrative from outside in to say, okay, it's like the people versus the state type of scenario, which obviously now leads us into a cultural conflict, which is really significant. But anyway, we're in contestation. That's totally fine, and we know that. Mike, let's go to the specifics. What has actually happened? Can you give us a couple of bullets as to, okay, this has happened, that's happened, this has happened?
Absolutely. No, thank you. And just to kind of further a couple of the points made, I think, being in this town for as long as I have been and seeing this, a couple things. From day one, I mean, obviously, to Steve's point, yes, I mean, everything that pretty much this administration ran on, they're enacting. I think the shock here locally, and we've seen change of administrations many, many times. It's a very common thing in Washington, D.C., right? And in this area. But what we didn't see was the speed of which this administration is moving, right? So it's kind of interesting how it all happened. I mean, we knew that this particular department was going to be stood up. We knew that well before even the election. We knew that was talked about. With Elon Musk, sort of leading that effort as an advisor. He's technically an advisor. What we didn't know at the time was that DOGE would be born out of the U.S. Digital Services, which was actually a White House office, an established office within the White House. It was actually established under the Obama administration. So it does have certain authorities to audit and things of that nature. So when you look around, and I'll speak specifically from the federal workforce, because that's really where I'm focused. When it had come in, it was, again, the lightning speed that they've been operating under, going into each department and every agency. And there's a different story for each agency and department. As you know, within the United States government, you've seen departments, obviously, as of today, the Department of Education, USAID, other agencies like that were hit very, very hard for whatever reason this administration has. So when we see the fallout, the layoffs and the rifts, those agencies had been hit harder than others. Although this is pretty government wide, we are seeing reductions in force across the government. Now, that being said, to Kate's point, this is going to be bounced around the courts probably for the entire length of the administration and possibly throughout. So for those of you that may not necessarily, I don't know how far the news goes outside the Beltway, but the Capitol Beltway here in Washington, D.C., but we're seeing, obviously, reductions in force. We are seeing layoffs. We're seeing furloughs. We're also seeing, courts, judges coming in and forcing people back to work. This is going to be going back and forth. Here's the reality. The reality is it's created, obviously, a lot of confusion. People are in limbo. A lot of people don't know where they stand. I think the flow of information just isn't coming down through the traditional authorities. Right. It is coming through the Office of Personnel Management. It's not coming through department heads or anything like that. So again, it's moving so fast. It's created a lot of confusion amongst the U.S. federal workforce. 20% of which, by the way, is only in the Washington, D.C. area. I mean, the majority of this workforce is worldwide. So there are people impacted, obviously, overseas. There's people impacted nationwide. So this is really having an effect everywhere. It's not always, it's not just here within the Washington, D.C. area, but we are seeing this. And, this is what I would consider the last stable workforce in the United States, right? People, among other things, being mission oriented and wanting to obviously serve your country, stability was really one of the number one, value propositions that the U.S. federal government has and possibly had. The future, time will determine whether that's still something. But
Mike, quick one. Can you tell me how many people? It's got to be into the millions, isn't it? Isn't the U.S. federal government the largest single employer in the U.S.? Like, do you know what a ballpark figure how many people actually?
Correct. It depends if you add in. There's millions. I mean, if you add in active U.S. military, it's about 2 million outside of and then the civilian workforce. Yeah, I don't have the exact figure, but it's a couple million. We're looking at, numbers that they're throwing out that they want to get to, probably 200, a little over 200,000. Now, remember, we've seen reductions in force in the past. We saw it in the 1980s with the Ronald Reagan administration. We saw post-Cold War in the first Bush and Clinton eras. The difference was it was organized and planned. That's the difference today. Today, it's coming in much like a corporate type of we've seen this in the past where corporations will do mass layoffs. We're seeing that, and the U.S. federal government is just not used to that. I'm going to say this. I don't think that there's a person in the Washington, D.C. area that would argue that there needs to be cuts and reductions in bureaucracy, even to the workforce. I have not met anyone, regardless of political affiliation, that does not believe that. Again, I'm going to go back to the way it's being done and the speed at which it's being done. To work for the U.S. federal government, regardless of where you work across departments, it can take months, even years, to go through that process. So the investment and everything that is put in, even before it's a very competitive field, right? And it's high volume, and it's very reactive. I mean, the way that the U.S. government recruits is very different than corporations. And in your questions that we talked about earlier, HR works much different in the federal government. We may be used to it in the corporate world. HR's function in the federal government is a little different. Whereas in corporate, it's much more compliant, protecting, and things of that nature. HR in the government, although doing employee investigations and whatnot, it's more of a transition and administrative function. I don't mean to knock HR. I have the highest respect for it. But I've worked in those organizations. So it's more of a transactional type of function in the federal government. So my point is, if you're being impacted today in the federal government by a layoff or a RIF, your chances are most of the time across these agencies, you're not being contacted by HR. It's coming straight down from the Office of Personnel Management. And that's also something that's new, right? Because typically you hear from your supervisor or an HR representative. You're actually hearing from entities that you traditionally have not heard from. Now, whether that's by design or that's the way that it's rolled out, that's what's created the confusion and obviously has really impacted the workforce and its confidence in its own employment.
I've heard, okay, I'm going to bring you in a second, but I just, because I know, Mike, you're based in Washington, D.C., aren't you? So
yes.
I've seen a map which kind of looks at real estate prices and so on like this. I mean, is that a real, is that a reality on the ground? Like there's enough people that have been insecuritized, let's say, and then realize, you know what, I've got to get my house on the market because it could well be, I'm be paying a mortgage without a salary here. And I can't do that. I'm out. Are we seeing a real estate impact, for instance, in DC?
Not yet. And I'll tell you why. Many of the folks that have been impacted are on administrative leave. So they're being paid to the end of the U.S. government fiscal year, which is around 1 October. Now, the probationary employees, that varies. Because the probationary employees, you can. Because you're on, usually it's a 2 to 4 year probationary period. So if your department, where the Office of Personnel Management came into your department and said, we're going to reduce probationary employees, they can do that. They don't need, that's perfectly in line with U.S. federal government. So if you go to work for the government, you have 2 years, you're on probationary period. So if for whatever reason they don't feel you're up to par, they can do that. So they started there. That's what DOGE did. So they have every right to do that, this administration. Yeah, it's the housing, we haven't seen that yet. Unemployment hasn't gone up because people are on administrative leave. So it'll be a little while until we see a local impact. People are still reeling, right? These are folks that have been if you're not probationary, and by the way, probationary could be mid-career. So if you accepted a promotion, went into a different job, you were also impacted. So, it's...
So basically, a bunch of people that are most affected are the ones that have switched jobs recently, in the last 2 years or so, and then find themselves still within this probation period. They're most vulnerable because they don't have the security of the extra time. So all of these EOs, so to say, will probably disproportionately affect or impact individuals that are currently within the probationary period. So that's a new wrinkle I didn't realize. Very interesting. Thank you, Mike. Kate, let's bring you in. You wanted to jump in at some point, so I interrupt you. Go ahead.
Well, even when you're in a probationary position with the US government, you still have a property right in your position. And so you have a basis to say you have to have a reason for letting me go. And the bulk of the decision bringing all of these probationary employees back is that you didn't have a reason and Congress funded these positions. And so you don't get to eliminate things that Congress has appropriated because Congress has the power of the purse. You're the executive. You are to execute what we have allocated. And so you've got these two bases to say these probationary employees and all federal employees have a right and we're funded. So when we talk about things like a government shutdown, so like we were looking at a government shutdown last week, right? We needed to pass a CR to keep the government running. Some of that money runs on more than one fiscal year. For example, a large chunk of the foreign affairs budget does on multi-year funding, especially when it is involving different agencies like DOD and GSA and things like that. In the positions, those are funded over multi-year. So while the government might shut down because they've run out of money, run out of the allocation for Congress, a lot of these positions are on multi-year money. You can't let these people go. You can't shut down this part because the money's been allocated by Congress. And so there's a lot of confusion, and it looks really good to go in and slash and grab and take whatever you want, take that information. But as the courts, which are running at incredibly fast speeds, by the way, all props to the DC Circuit, they are stopping this because of the constitutional crisis we're in. You have a congressional funded position, you get to have that congressional funded position, provided you're not meeting the criteria to actually eliminate your position. So there's just is a lot of chaos, and all of those families that this is affected, this is huge, particularly for USAID. Like you've got 2,500 employees and their families overseas, and you're going to close this with like 1 day's notice. The DC area cannot absorb 2,500 families with kids in high school and middle school. They can't absorb that fast. And that's the speed at which it feels like it's happening. But when the court steps in and says, nah, you can't do this, it just leads to a lot of unnecessary anxiety and angst. If we were going to eliminate the department,
I get what you're saying. I totally get what you're saying. But if I was to take the Muskian view on this, I'd say, yeah, here's more evidence of this state like being, intransigent. And is there not like now a move to start impeaching judges and stuff like this? So it's just an escalation of what is perceived by the current White House as just this. I think that the imagination that the White House currently has, and again, if anybody has a different view in the chat or whatever, please let me know that I'm incorrect. I think they perceive all of it, the courts, the law, Congress, all of it is just basically more like the permanent state. And so whenever there's a failure for them to execute what they want via tweet, if that is not like if that doesn't manifest into immediate action, it's perceived, okay, there's like more people just intransigent, we got to go and whack those people. And then it's like putting people, under legal pressure. We don't even know what kind of like gray pressure that might be existing on all of this, right? So there's legal pressure coming in that's explicit. Where is the implicit pressure? We don't know. I think the general ambiance is super hostile, right? I mean, the ambiance feels like there's like relish when we're slashing these people and throwing them into insecurity. There's a relish in this, and it just feels like, okay, we can like talk about the technicalities, but those technicalities kind of feed into their narrative that actually it's more of this deep state stuff. Also, Gwen mentioned something really interesting. Who is in control of Congress, and are they being particularly inactive? Like, are they doing anything here? It seems that there's like, what is the Republicans run Congress, right? So basically, as far as I understand it, Trump has got like a significant support, let's say, within the system that he's actually trying to destroy, if that makes any sense. Is that true?
Yeah, but they have to do it the right way. You can't just go slash and grab. You have to have Congress to take action to eliminate these. That's how the separation of powers, that's how what folks believe are geniuses who created the Constitution. You have to do it the way through the power of the purse, which rests with Congress. If Congress was jumping at it as fast as this president is jumping at it, then this would be legal. But that's not what's happening.
Why is Congress? This is the thing with power, though. If you don't exercise power, it doesn't exist. And it seems to me that what is occurring is that, and if you exercise power, then it does exist. And it seems to be what's happening here is that the government is kind of shrinking because it's not acting, but the White House is expanding because it is acting. So suddenly you have this a real shift of power here. Steve, you want to come in on this?
Yeah, just in terms of Congress's power, one of the things that's not, even by most Americans, is not well appreciated, is that there are different rules for different majorities, for different kinds of congressional actions. So if Congress just wants to pass a budget, for example, it's basically just a majority. But if they want to eliminate the Department of Education, then 60% of the senators have to vote in favor of that. And that puts Republicans about 7 votes short. And that assumes that all Republicans vote for it. So they're not going to get 60 votes in the Senate to eliminate the Department of Education. If they want to impeach judges, it's 2/3. And it's not just 2/3 of those who are present, it's 2/3 of those seated or elected. So they need to get like 67 senators to impeach a judge. So the judges are pretty safe. It's one thing for the president or for Musk or somebody else to say, we're going to impeach this judge, to introduce articles of impeachment. It has about as much weight as if Mike or Kate or I did that. It's right. It's nice. And maybe some people on some social media will go, wow, Kate, that's really interesting. I love you. Doesn't really mean anything. But I think where we're heading, and this is what really frightens me, is where we're heading, I think, is that the executive branch is not going to be checked by Congress, at least this Congress. We've got about another year and a half of that. And they're not going to abide by what the courts say. And we've got a little bit of that going on right now. So there was at very, very early in the country's history, I think it was 1803, 1804, something like that, there was a very important Supreme Court case that made it really clear that the executive and Congress have to abide by court decisions. But it's kind of on the honor system, because the courts don't control the military. They don't control the police. They can't go out and arrest somebody. They can't legislate. They can't pass statutes, or it's so the norms are what are being attacked right now. And
yep.
I think it's hard for everybody in this world, because we all were born well after the US came into existence, for us to understand that just because something's been done for 200 years doesn't mean it's going to be done that way for the next 200 years.
Yeah, I think the reason why I think Musk is
thank you, Steve.
is a genuine threat to HR is not because of, is exactly as you say, Steve. It's the changing of the norms and also challenging sort of the power of compliance, right? So there's a bunch of rules that we say, okay, we're going to do this because we've got to comply. Otherwise terrible things that happen. Then suddenly, actually, a significant figure decides not to comply, and in fact does things in order to almost bait litigation. This is started in Twitter. If you remember, he came in and immediately fired people with exactly the same sort of modus operandi. An email to say, look, if you don't show up to work tomorrow, you're fired. We accept your resignation. Stuff like that. Okay, that contravenes so many employment laws in almost every country, right? There's very few countries that would actually permit this type of behavior. In any case, he did it anyway, and I think he did it because of contempt for compliance. And so, okay, if we're at that point where and it's a norm-changing tactic. It's not to say he wants to do it as it's almost like the real point is to destroy the value and the sense that the honor system. So I think that's having a real effect, surely. Moving on to where we're at with HRTA. So obviously, US Gov right now is a terrible place to try and recruit for. I assume that the employer brand of US Gov right now is that's a tough sell, right? It's going to be hard to say, hey, work for us. Yes, no, maybe not. I mean, I don't know. Where are we with this?
Mike, this is probably a good one for you. I actually think that there are certain areas of the US government that are actually hiring a lot.
It's off and on, right? So right now, a number of agents, I mean, you have this 90-day freeze with some exceptions. I think GSA mentioned today they're going to keep the freeze to the end of the year. So it's department by department. You're seeing it. And the freeze goes on, the freeze goes off. So again, as we talk about confusion, everyone is still trying, typically US government doesn't move fast, right? When it comes to the bureaucratic stuff. This administration is forcing them to move faster than they ever have, and they're kind of stuck in it, right? So, yeah, I mean, you still have to hire, you still have a mission, right? So again, there's lack of communication, and it's really being hit hard. I want to go back on, and I will, many of us that are probably here in this call are used to working recruiting in a corporate environment, which is a mixture of both reactive and proactive. In the US federal government, it's almost 100% reactive. 100% reactive, meaning you don't really have recruitment staff. People usually are HR officers, or they are rotating through, most of the US government rotates. They have this rotating type of structure that you'll do a job for 2 or 3 years, move on, and somebody comes in behind you. So understand that when you're in corporate America, you're typically sourcing it. The US federal government, minus active duty military, doesn't do that. So understand that how this impacts, it depends, right? You have to look at it. If, in fact, the federal government is not going to hire at the volume and the rate it did in the past, how does that impact that process? Yet to be told. I will tell you, when this is all said and done and the air clears, the U.S. government is really going to have to take a hard look and say, okay, if, in fact, we're not going to have these departments, the mission is still there. The mission doesn't go away, right? Particularly in the national security space, you can cut it down, but that mission still grows. So you still have to have a combination of federal employees, contractors, and everything like that. That is where I'm looking to say, okay, what's next? So at some point, the U.S. government, and they have to be thinking about this, is how are we going to go about as we go forward once this is all said and done, and what does that look like? So I think under all of this, there may be an opportunity here for talent acquisition and human resources to kind of step up and become a really key component going forward. So that's what I'm looking at. Now, that may be biased because I'm a TA guy, but I will tell you that at some point, this mission doesn't change. This isn't an organization that can go out of business. It's not one that's going to get acquired. It has to continue. There's a huge mission out there, regardless of whether you're in the Department of Defense, DHS, EPA, wherever you are, there is a mission that has to continue.
I thought that Canada was going to acquire the U.S. and make it the 11th province. Oh, no, it was the other way around. Never mind.
Don't worry, Stephen. We get absorbed first if that happens.
Yeah. Those of us in Minnesota, we're not as worried as people say in Texas. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, very interesting. I'm going to kind of open the stage up here, folks. So if you are a person that cares about this topic or you've got something to say, come on screen and say it. Let's just roll in. Obviously, be aware that this is live stream. Nothing gets edited. What you say goes out. So if you've got something to say, come on, let's hear it. Mike, really interesting about sort of the need for the work to continue in government. Typically, as I've observed, again, I don't have direct experience, but as I've observed these cost-cutting measures that have occurred in different countries, in different states, and what have you, what happens is a bunch of people leave the payroll, but then they kind of just turn back around and deliver the same services, often sometimes the next day as a contractor for a different business, and they're off the payroll, off the head count. Hey, look at the government efficiency here. But actually, it's the same person doing the job. It's just, the money's just being rewired in a different way. Is that happening? Do you anticipate that happening?
It always has. It's very, very common. Typically, your second career is back in your government building in a lot of cases. But right now, it's still up in the air, right? There hasn't, I will speak, there isn't much movement on the contractor side. We're sort of in this era of limbo. Could it go that direction? It could. It could certainly go in that direction where you actually have, more privatization, very possible. It all depends. It really just depends upon budgets, what, you're going to have that argument of what is inherently government and what is not. I mean, I'll be honest with you, the majority of work support the contractor base supporting federal government is huge. I mean, it's monstrous today, right? So yes, you're starting to see some of the contracts canceled across USAID, obviously, huge contractor base, unfortunately, overnight, right? I mean, we're coaching a lot of those people. We have a coaching practice here. So we're coaching federal employees that have been impacted every single day. So I'm seeing this firsthand. We're seeing the casualties of this firsthand. So it is happening, but to what extent, that's yet to be determined. We're still waiting on that.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Steve, wonderful to see you. Why don't you quickly introduce yourself? Who are you? What it is you do, Steve?
I am Steve Levy. I am principal talent advisor for a company that I just left. So, that being said, I know everyone here very well. I want to give Mike a hug because the Mike I know smiles a lot more than he smiles. That's really
got to be serious, Steve. I got to be serious.
Given the situation, I understand. I've been thinking about this for quite a long time. About when these cuts first started coming around, and it was clear that Musk was going to bring in the Twitter playbook, which was really a slash and burn type thing, and we'll just figure stuff out. The strong will survive. But then I start, thinking about where exactly, there, to Mike's point, there are positive and negative elements to what's taking place here. For those who've never done, GovCon work, and I've done both. Mike knows this. We've been at the same conferences with the same groups of people. It is a different animal, and there are the stories of duplication of efforts, of $6,000 toilet seats and things. They're real, and there's nothing inherently wrong, because in our corporate lives, efficiency, fiscal responsibility, they're real. But at some point there's a realization. This is a chicken or egg thing. Does humanity what comes first in the overall scheme of things? With all these cuts, there is an inordinate amount of trepidation amongst our friends, Mike, that again we know in the DMV area, who are on the corporate side or not on the GovCon side. Even those on the GovCon side, they're going, they've seen we're not going to hire now. We're going to slow things down or stop things. But the important thing to consider is if you think of even potential for cuts, means there are hundreds of thousands of people who work for government adjacent companies who, there is literally the cascade effect down the line. It's all companies that must abide by the OFCCP requirements. I mean, there's a massive cascade of stuff flowing downhill, and there's no end in sight. There's no levee, pun intended, to stop that. I mean, these are real issues. And so, we're seeing things like, people are wondering, they know, step back. So that's a pretty important thing to consider. Contractor versus FTE stuff, it throws the whole hiring environment into a topsy-turvy thing. So how do we address that? Can the private sector take up all these people? No, not even close.
That's a clear answer, no. I mean, that's a clear answer, no, right? Because obviously, U.S. Fed government is such a large employer that it's almost irreplaceable employer, and there's not a comparable institution that can do all of this. And yeah, go ahead, Steve.
But the other really important piece is there are, and Mike has hired many of them. There are some incredibly smart people in the federal government who are bound by the classification and pay requirements of OPM. Now, correct me, I think GS15, Mike, for 2025, I think the max is somewhere like 159K this year.
On the standard GS scale.
On the standard,
they're varying GS scales in some set. I mean, for the most part, yeah, the majority do follow right now. It depends on what step you are, but yeah, that's where it's.
So the interesting thing there, so you have people who are incredibly talented, who are potentially making what, Mike, $100,000 less plus than people on the go. So think about that. If I'm an employer, I mean, the ripple effects, I can have two of you for one of you. Nobody ponders the implications on workforce planning in the private sector if all these people suddenly become available. Think of all the smart people. I mean, that's just, we have to consider these things in this country now. If this goes in, if this plan really starts, taking hold.
If it does,
one thing that's true, though, Steve. On this, though, Steve, one thing is true is that there isn't like there isn't, let's say, overthinking when it comes down to these policies, right? I mean, that's the entire that's the entire vibe. So this is where we've got. So there's not going to be overly strategizing. I don't think there's a guy on who mentioned that the policy is basically what the last guy in the room said, right? So I think there's an element to that. Like Trump is quite a changeable person. He's very mercurial. Like the last guy in the room, after it basically will determine what the policy is. This is not going to be overthinking. There's no strategy. This is the style and it's the substance of the regime. This is how it's going to work. So I want to shift on this real quick to the corporate side, because the effect of these EOs and these policies, of course, have affected corporate directly, because there's been either direct instruction or there's been sort of implicit instruction. It's very prominent, for instance, in the inauguration. All of these heads of big tech companies were prominent. They all offered up $1 million to support that. That was a tribute. It was literally it was kissing the ring. And of course, there's probably they read the room. It's like, okay, we've got to pull back on the DE&I stuff. Let's pull back on aspirational hiring, aspirational sort of quotas, and so on. All of this is now being pulled back. So we're already seeing an effect on corporate. And every one of those big tech companies, when they do something, they also then affect a bunch of other companies all the way down the track. So this is an attempt at cultural change. Go ahead, Steve.
No, but it's been more. But you hit upon a really important thing. It's for lack of a better word, it's the genuflection amongst tech executives. You like that, Kate? Is that a good one?
Very much, because I think of it as currying favor. Like, we want to be looked upon well by the administration so that we don't get attacked. And that's what I see happening.
I mean, this has a Godfather's. I mean, if you don't do it, if you don't genuflect, you're gonna find like a horse's head in your bed. I mean, that's not. I don't say that. I say that partially in jest, but not completely.
I was going to say, I don't think that's a joke. Like this is no longer a joke. Like, how do we know what is true or not? The rhetoric coming out is really aggressive. It's
Mike, you know this better than I do because of your years in GovCon, but there are some mean sons of guns and vindictive people, well, I guess everywhere. But
politics is dirty, right? Business will do what business does. Business has a profit margin they have to keep, right? That doesn't surprise me. I'm not saying it's right. I don't have an opinion, but it is what it is. That pendulum constantly swings. You see it every time a party change. In the United States, you've really got a two-party system. It's a Republican or a Democrat, right? I don't think since the Whig Party we haven't had a candidate, right? So.
Bring back the way.
Business is going to follow the money. They're going to follow the money, right? So you have politics and you have business, and that's what they did. Plus, they saw Elon had a front row seat, right? You had to get in there, right? That's your competition. So business will do what business does, and in 4 years, whether another party comes in, you'll see that pendulum swing back again. Happens every 4 to 8 years in this town, and I'm sure that's similar to any capital city around the world when you have a political party change. But yeah, very, very big here.
Yeah, but fear-based government
Go ahead, Kate. Go ahead, Kate.
is not very good for companies.
No. I want to point out that there was one tech guy that was not on that dais and did not donate the same amount of money. And we have all hated this organization for a long time. But God, you gotta love Microsoft at this point in time, right? Because they weren't there, they weren't showing the money. But then when you see organizations like our hometown former hero Target, capitulate, we see stock prices drive down. We see empty parking lots, even here in the state of Minnesota, where we love our Target. And you see Costco jumping up. You see John Deere jumping up because they're holding the line against the administration. So there's going to be that uncertainty creates more uncertainty and more trepidation, and more likely that we're going to see a recession when customer or consumer indexes drop, right?
All right, guys, I need to move forward because we're running out of time. Does Musk and Trump what is the likelihood of Trump Musk killing DE&I?
Unlikely.
Unlikely.
Really hard, but unlikely long term.
I mean, Kate, when you say killing, I'm the only one who's old enough who was here when the Civil Rights Act was signed, and in '66. So I think, Stephen, you're close.
I was born in '66, so I didn't have much to do with it.
Okay, so there, and you don't kill diversity, you kill the media's conception, certain media's conception of what it is. The part that the part that's very odd here is that if you look at the demographic makeup of any company's customers of our country, and this is the theory behind it. Theoretically, diversity hiring means your company is going to represent the people who buy your products and services. So when business people are against this, I have to question, the hamsters running on the little wheels in their head, and wonder how does that jibe with what they're trying to do in a capitalistic market. It doesn't make sense, but then again, nothing in the world of politics generally often makes sense, and that's just me, thinking out loud. But
I want to share something real quick, because I ran a poll before we went live here, just a quick sort of off the cuff thing, just to see what people thought, and maybe we can just examine that real quick. Let me just share screen. Share screen. Not a video. Sorry, give me a sec. Folks, whilst I'm fiddling with this, why don't we take the moment? Make sure you share your LinkedIn in the chat stream and connect with everyone who cares about this topic. I think one of the things that everyone can do, as ever, is to strengthen your professional connections. Make sure the information is flowing. That's going to help everyone, no matter what the circumstance. Go ahead and do that. Connect with everyone else who's done the same. And if you're watching this on LinkedIn, please do that also. I think it's worth us basically just to make sure we're thoroughly embedded with each other, so to say. Okay, how do I do this? Let's get rid of that. Can I even go here? Okay. I think I'm sharing my screen, right?
Yeah, you are. We can see chances of Trump/Musk entirely killing
HR.
Yeah. So it's a bit of a provocation, but we've got already 300 votes on it. So I just wanted to share. I don't even know what the results are, so I want to actually just quickly have a look at it. But I don't seem to be able to trigger this.
Hit the 3 more options, and then we'll see.
Is this the one?
Nope.
Copy link to post. I don't want to do that.
No,
go
see
down.
The 3 more options.
See where it says 3 more options?
A little bit more down.
Down.
There.
200%.
Oh, 3 more options.
No, up.
Here.
There.
Sorry, guys.
It's okay.
Sorry, guys.
It's almost like it's midnight for you, Hung. It's almost
it's actually like 6. It's actually 6 o'clock in the morning. So and the reality is, I've just come from a nightclub, so it's possibly having an effect. But here we go. This is just 300 votes, but we see what are the chances of Musk and Trump entirely killing HR, not even DEI. It was go up a level. 100%. So actually, it's 20% of people think he's going to do it. 50%, there's 22% say he's going to do it. I think the majority, 43%, say there's zero chance that the objective, if that is the objective, of killing HR, which I actually do think that's the case. I do think that fundamentally the Musk approach is hostile to HR and wants to see it disappear. But anyway, there we go. Let's leave this conversation with a final sort of round robin, and I guess here we're directing it towards people that might be directly affected by these cuts. There must be many employees, also many people within the people ops space. I mean, Mike, I take your point that recruiting and the recycling, the systematic of it may work differently, but there's going to be folks here that we would consider, pretty much, they're in our space in their own way. What's your message to them? Like, what's the best thing we can do to support people that are directly affected, particularly within our space? Let's give that some thought. Mike, let's kick off with you. What's your advice?
Yeah, thank you. And one of the things I'll say, because we coach so many of these impacted folks, and I've spent my entire career when I wasn't in government recruiting people out of government into second careers. I would say when you see a resume, if you see an application from somebody from a government agency, the language on it may be unfamiliar to you, but give it a shot. One of the things that we find is that translation. The government has different speak, it has different acronyms, it is a completely different culture. That all being said, you have a lot of very talented, smart, intelligent people that have always been very mission driven. And most of them will continue to be mission driven, even in a post-career environment. So by all means, if you're in recruiting and you see applications, and I'm sure you're going to continue to see an increase of them, particularly your US-based companies, by all means, give them an extra thought, please. That's all I can say.
Thank you, Mike. Kate, your thoughts, your bit of advice for people directly affected here?
Hold on. I know this is horrible. I wish I could give you all a hug, because I would if I could. But hold on, because it will swing back. And if the court orders are followed, you're going to be back at work hopefully very soon. But Godspeed. I wish you all the best. And if you are in TA and recruiting, if you spend one LinkedIn post doing a translation for a federal contractor, you are helping the community. So I would encourage you all to do that.
Thank you, Kate. Steve?
I was echo what Mike's. It's exactly what I was going to say. The ignorance on the corporate side with respect to GovCon, military, it's unfortunate, but it can be remedied. It's don't look at a 20-page government CV and go, I'm not going to read it. It's your job. Read the damn thing. Ask questions.
Okay, this also goes two ways though as well, doesn't it? It's like, number one, there needs to be less kind of presumption on the private sector side on government sort of people who've tenured in career. But also the folks who've worked in government also need to translate into private sector speak. So I think, was it Liz that said this? You've got to cut this resume down. It's got to be two pages, 1 page, something like this.
But if you've been in GovCon for 20, 30 years, you can't just automatically turn a switch or go to your favorite LinkedIn resume influencer and think that they're going to turn into something that's corp speak. You're 100% correct. But it is on both sides. It's seek to understand before you're understood.
And that's also like maybe a topic of conversation for future Brain Food Live. Like, let's recognize the reality of the different cultures that have emerged, and how feasible is it to translate? I see Blake in LinkedIn saying actually pretty clear it doesn't translate, and I think there's a legitimate position to take because the translation between industries shifting from domain is quite a tricky thing to do for many people. Stephen, leave it with you. Final thoughts, a message to people directly affected.
One thing that we didn't cover is the impact on unions, because that is part of this. The Transportation Security Administration, which basically provides the security for the airports and stuff, that union is under attack also. And I think one of the reasons that union is under attack, and others will be too, is that these are the people who are standing up for the union members, the government workers. So one of my concerns is if the administration is successful at really marginalizing or even getting rid of these unions, it's going to be a lot harder for the average worker to fight back. So those of us who don't want to see all of this sort of haphazard hiring, getting rid of the best people, then we need to understand that their representatives largely are the unions, and that the unions are really standing in the way, just like the courts are. It's not just the judges.
Great. Okay, guys, thank you everybody so much for your education. Mike Bruni, Kate Bischoff, Steve Levy, and Stephen Rothberg, thank you for joining. Everyone who's watching the show, wherever you are, thank you for watching as well. Make sure you connect with everyone that shared their LinkedIn. Make sure you keep watching and participating in the public discourse. I think you need to have your voice in there, guys. Say stuff. Don't just sit there and take it. Very important you join the discourse and contribute to the public conversation. Okay, that's it. Let me say goodbye to our guests. See you later, folks. Have a very good day and a weekend. I'll be back next week, of course. We are going to be doing a Australia-focused show. I'm in Australia, in case you didn't know, and I will be here for another week. And of course, wherever we go, we have to do a how to hire in. So we're going to do a how to hire in Australia in 2025. We're going to get a load of local recruiters here to join us. That is going to be next Friday, and it will be in an Aussie-friendly time. I think it's at 12 o'clock Aussie time here, East Coast. So register for the show if you're interested in that. Follow the channel if you want to hear more. We're going to keep rolling every week on Brain Food Live. So that's how it's going to be. Okay, folks, that's it. Thanks for watching.